and excited to share with everybody our dear friend, Christena Cleveland. Christena Cleveland, PhD, is a social psychologist, public theologian, author, activist, and she is the founder and director of the Center for Justice and Renewal, as well as its sister organization, Sacred Folk, which creates resources to stimulate people's spiritual imaginations and support their journeys toward liberation. Something that we're all welcoming. She is an award-winning researcher and former professor at Duke University's Divinity School, and she lives in Boston. After the recent launch of her book, God is a Black Woman, she has dreamed up more ways to share the Black Madonna's profound power to heal and embolden us as we co-create a world in which all Black, Indigenous, and people of color, all women and all non-binary people are truly sacred and free. And you will be so glad you joined us today. Take it away, Christena.
Thank you for that introduction, Pastor David. Hi, everyone. It's good to see so many lovely faces. And hi to everyone who's not on Zoom. I see you too, and I'm sending you love. And I'm an introvert, so I totally get why cameras are off a lot of the time. And I bless that. I loved the quote that was read at the top of the gathering, the Kelly Brown Douglas quote that starts with something like, "We often don't think of God as mother." And that really resonates with me. And I, even as I heard that quote today, even though I've heard it before, read it before, a little tinge of pain erupted in my gut, which is where I usually feel pain when something is sad and sorrowful to me. And I know that my journey towards God as mother, God as Black woman, God as Black mother, God as Black cosmos, Black feminine, divine, has been such a beautiful and healing journey. And I'm sorry that I wasn't introduced to it as a little girl. What I learned quite emphatically in the church was that God was Father, and that is not inherently bad. But that was the only sort of relational image I had for God. Every once in a while, in a more, I grew up in Foursquare adjacent, like Word of Faith movement, also with a tinge of Black Pentecostalism. And so yeah, God was Father. Every once in a while, if I was out in what was considered the gray area, they might concede that the Holy Spirit wasn't it. Maybe genderless, but that was always suspicious, you know. And I did not really start thinking about God as mother, or God as female, God as having a uterus, although not all women have uteruses and not all people who have uteruses are women. I was in 2010, yeah, so I was 30 years old, summer I turned 30 years old. I happened to sign up for a gender and Christianity 4-week-long seminar in Seattle. And I had gotten some funding from, I think, like the Lilly Foundation or something. And I gathered with maybe 15 other academics, all from Christian colleges. At the time, I was teaching at Westmont College. And I remember going there, and all of the people there were female and or LGBTQ, which, having come from Westmont, where I was one of maybe like 5 female tenure track faculty members, I was like, and there were no gay people. So I was like, whoa, what's happening here? And it turns out all these people from these other Christian colleges were kind of outlaws too on their campuses. So we were in this little huddle together, and we read a lot of feminist theology that I didn't even know existed. And so for the first time, I read books like She Who Is, which is a book that looks at the Trinity from a female perspective. and all the members of the Trinity are female. I read Jacqueline Grant, who talked a lot about the difference between the way Black women view Jesus and the way white women view Jesus. So a real strong critique of white feminism is inherent in that book. And I read Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza, who's another sort of giant in the feminist theological world, who also had her own interpretation of Christ that was much more feminine. And I was blown open. For the first time, I really felt like I had some connection to theology that I could relate to, because with as I came to learn years later, with only seeing God as Father, sort of masculinity is overemphasized without any sort of femininity invited into our conception of God. And when masculinity is not in conversation with femininity, it becomes toxic. That's why we have so much toxic masculinity in our world. And I love the way my dear friend Matthew Fox, who's a wonderful rogue theologian, he says the feminine brings the masculine into balance. And so when masculinity is not really being impacted by femininity, we have this God who's kind of a bro God, the God who Donald Trump would relate to, or something like that. And so that was so much of what I had gotten. So when I finally got to look at these more feminine perspectives on God, which were written by women, I started to see, oh, so I could see God as like someone who breastfeeds. I can see God as someone who doesn't need me to clean up my act in order to approach her. Actually, kind of like a mother, when I have chickenpox, my mother is even more energized. When I have a poopy diaper, especially with diarrhea, my mom's even more energized. That's when she really kicks into mom mode. It doesn't matter if she's tired. And this can probably be said for any birth or adoptive parent, right? When the kid is crying, I mean, I don't have any biological kids, but I have, or even biological nieces and nephews, whole nother story, because we've been fasting and praying for our future spouses since we were 5. So we can talk about that later and the irony of that. But I have some adopted nieces and nephews. And even those little munchkins that I'm not even related to, have no real obligation to, when they start crying, something kicks in me, right? And I go into nurturing gear. And I love that idea of God as the messier we are, the more she opens her arms to us. That really healed me in a lot of ways as someone who grew up in holiness, Pentecostal culture, where I had to clean myself up first before God would even really welcome me. So that was really powerful in 2010 to have that encounter. And then a few years later, so it's interesting, right? Because all of these, I learned so much about God the Father in the institutional church, but in order to learn about God the Mother, or God as feminine, or God as woman, I really had to go on a wild goose chase, because there's a conspiracy. It's like hidden from us. And so I eventually, maybe 3 or 4 years later, in my mid 30s, encountered Richard Rohr's teachings on the universal Christ, which were really helpful for me. Richard Rohr is a Franciscan priest who writes a lot about how Jesus Christ is one iteration of the Christ. He said we took Christ and made it into Jesus's last name, rather than recognizing that Christ is like a universal presence in the world that shows up in different historical and geographical places. And so one of the things I was really wrestling with was, if God isn't male, then why is Jesus male? I must believe that Jesus is male. If Jesus is male, I have to believe that God is male. And so it was really helpful to connect with Father Richard's teachings, because he helped me understand Jesus was just one iteration of the Christ. And as I did more research on my own as a theologian, I discovered that there are Christophanies, that's what theologians call them, Christ appearances throughout Scripture, and all throughout the Judeo-Christian scriptures, but also throughout Muslim scriptures, throughout indigenous teachings. And an example of a Christophany in the Judeo-Christian scriptures is the angel that Jacob wrestled with. A lot of scholars are in agreement that that was Christ showing up in another form besides Jesus. And so this idea that Jesus is one version of the Christ helped me to separate this attachment that I had to Jesus's male essentialized identity. And that's saying something about who Christ is, something definitive and conclusive about who Christ is. And so that was a real wonderful awakening for me. Okay, like now I can start to look for Christ in all sorts of places and spaces and people and bodies. And I was able to connect more deeply with Kelly Brown Douglas, who's a Black feminist theologian, a womanist theologian, who says Christ is a Black woman whenever Black women are doing things that heal our community. That's Christ, that's a Christophany right there. And I also discovered in my research on the Black Madonna, which I'll tell you about in just a moment. I'll introduce you to her in just a moment if you're not already like enthralled with her, that across history within the Christian tradition, so many mystics, mystics that we quote often were connected to the divine feminine in Christ. Juliana Norwich being one of the most famous ones, but if you read her showings, which are also called the Revelation of Divine Love, she refers to Christ as mother multiple times. But then I also got connected to a few other just really wonderful old mystics that most people haven't heard of, who, like, for example, Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, and he talked about, he was such a mystic and like so out there, and he made this graphic depiction of Christ where he said, suck not so much the wounds as the breasts of the crucified one. Suck not so much the wounds as the breasts of the crucified one. And Sister Marguerite de Oint, another mystic in the 12th century, said, my mother labored for me for like a day or so. Christ labored for me for 30 years. And so getting connected to these old saints who, in order to be as revelatory and forward thinking as they were, and to still have an impact on us now, were really connected to this divine feminine in Christ. And so that sent me on a really beautiful journey to discover images of God as a woman, particularly a Black woman. This was also coinciding with like the Black Lives Matter and the Me Too movement. And so I was really interested in identifying images of God that could relate to my experience as a Black person and as a woman, a God who could say, yes, Black lives do matter, a God who could say, yes, Me Too. They did that to me too. They silenced me too. They policed me too. They called me a whore too for not sticking to the rules and the regulations that the patriarchy handed down. And so I didn't have to look far. As a Protestant, I had to go outside of my little Protestant box, because I definitely grew up in church settings where Catholicism was evil, maybe even more evil than like Islam or something, you know, because they were really our threat, the Catholics. And so I had to go outside of that Protestant bubble and start looking for images, and I found the Black Madonna within Catholicism. Technically, Catholicism sort of claims her, but what she is an image of Mary, the Mother of God, but she's Black, and so she's relatively rare. There are about 450 sort of famous documented Black Madonnas around the world that still exist. There were many more over history, but through wars and famine and all the sorts of things, they were destroyed. One of the first that I went to visit was, I think, in 2016 or so. I went to go visit the Black Madonna of Costa Rica. And this is a little tiny, as you can see, it's just like, oops, it's like smaller than my hand. It's like my thumb size. This is a little teeny tiny just image of her that I picked up while I was there. She's in Cartago, Costa Rica, and she's called the Princess of Peace. She's called the patron. She's also the patroness of the poor. And she was discovered in the 1500s by a Black Costa Rican woman near her house in a really poor part of the town. And she wanted to pick, she found her on a little rock, according to the legend. They're like superheroes kind of. They all have their like origin stories, these Black Madonnas. And according to the story, she picked up this Black Madonna that was on a rock and wanted to bring her to the church to show the priest, to sort of get her like, you know, this is an official sighting of the Madonna. But when she picked her up to take her to go, she brought her to her house and then was going to bring her to the church. But then the Madonna was missing and she found her again back at the rock. So then she picked her up again, brought her to her house so she could bring her to the church. And then the Madonna went back to the rock. And this happened 3 times. And they believe that it was because she wanted to make it known that she remained, that she was found amongst the Black poor people and remained with the Black poor people. And so they actually ended up building her church right there on that site because she refused to be moved to where the, you know, cathedral was and the important white people, the colonizers, essentially, right? So this is one of the first that I visited. It was a little sneak attack because I knew my mom wanted to go to Costa Rica for her 60th birthday. So I took my mom to Costa Rica and we also did a little pilgrimage. So she thought that was fun too. This is another Black Madonna. This is actually one that I just met last fall. I was in France, November, December, January of this past year. And this is the Black Madonna of Marseille. She's a lot older than the Princess of Peace of Costa Rica. She appears on the scene officially in like the 4th century. A lot of people believe that she was brought to Marseille by Luke and or Mary Magdalene. It's unclear, but she's a gorgeous Black Madonna. Yeah, and she lives in the crypt of one of the basilicas in Marseille. And then this is another Black Madonna. This is an antique. This one's like over 100 years old. And it's the little teeny tiny wooden sculpture of the Black Madonna of Le Puy on Velay. And so if you know the, what's it called? The Camino pilgrimage that a lot of people take through Spain. There's one starting place in France, and the starting place is Le Puy. And actually, if people start the Camino in France, they start at her altar. That's the official beginning of the Camino. So she is like one of the, she blesses pilgrims. She blesses people who go on spiritual journey, who ask questions that go beyond what they've been taught to ask, who push boundaries, who don't accept the patriarchal idea that your spiritual authority is outside of you, but really take seriously that you can connect with sacredness on your own without a priest, and that you are in fact a priest to yourself. And what's fascinating about her, she's another really, really, really old one. She's probably, well, the Catholic Church discovered her in the 4th century as well. And she's actually a goddess that's connected to Inanna, who's like the oldest known goddess in the world, you know, probably 30, 40,000 years old. And the worship of Inanna, this dark goddess, was taking place in this part of France that she's in, Le Puy, this very, very, very old part of France. Like even if you go to Le Puy now, it's like a medieval village. It's really beautiful. And when the Catholic Church came in the 4th century, the bishop was threatened by the indigenous people's worship of this dark goddess. And so rather than just, you know, coming in and, you know, kind of doing the normal imperialistic thing where they come and try to convert everybody, he was so threatened by the people's devotion to this dark goddess that he annihilated her temple and built the cathedral right on top of it. So just really, really, really violent. That shows just how, to me, that really affirmed why it was so hard for me to connect with the divine feminine streams within Christianity, because they have been silenced really violently like this. There's really been a conspiracy. And what the people did, though, is they were like, okay, clearly you want us to be Catholic, so we're just going to make the Black Madonna our new goddess. And so she sort of lived on as the Black Madonna. So this Black Madonna has been there since the 4th century. And it's actually really fascinating. She's so little. I wanted to show you also, this is a candle that I bought while I was there. Normally she's enrobed and she has like she's kind of like a fashion fiend. Like she has like 500 of these outfits, and they're all these like glorious robes. And she's called the Queen of the Cathedral. And if you go to this massive cathedral that this bishop built in the 4th century, that's been renovated, but it's like a World Heritage Site and all these things. You go in, it's like the size of a stadium. Normally at the front, you see a crucifix in a Catholic cathedral like this. There's no crucifix. There's just her. She is the center, and she's just called the Queen of the Cathedral. And so it's interesting how that bishop, 4th century bishop, is probably rolling in his grave because of what actually happened after his intentions. But she's always adorned in these like really gorgeous robes, and they're different every time. And you can buy, I think I have about 30 different postcards of her in different outfits, which I think is so great. And she reminds me of the Black Madonna of La Chapelle Jeunesse. She was a little teeny tiny Black Madonna that I walked 42 miles across a winter mountain range to get to one time. And she's in this village of like 400 people. And I call her the mother of all bling, because she is just decked out, and she has like these like white baby angels who are like carrying all of her like regal, like her crown and her jewels and everything. And so she has this like reparations entourage, and she's just resting and chilling. And she has all these like white baby angels carrying and doing all her hard work for her. And I just love how much she kind of has this same energy as this Black Madonna of Le Puy, of just like, it's finally time for us Black women to get what we deserve, to rest. It's so affirming. So anyways, I just wanted to share a little bit of my journey towards the Black Madonna, why she's so powerful for me, and how much joy she brings me, to be able to connect with a God who relates to my story as a Black woman, both the hard parts and the really joyful parts. And also, I think if it weren't for the Black Madonna, I wouldn't be able to embrace God as Father, because I was so hurt by the patriarchy in the church, that it's really just been recently, like in the last year or two, that I've been able to say, oh yeah, that's right. God as Father is a healing image. It's just, it's been distorted so badly. But now that I have Mother, I can connect with Father in a more powerful way. And also, I don't think God is binary. And so I'm also reading really wonderful books and being taught, like the Black Trans Prayer book and stuff like that, that just help me to connect with trans images of God and non-binary images of God, and just the whole spectrum of how God wants to show up in my life, so that I can then affirm the sacredness of all people, and not just people like me, or not just men, or like I was taught when I was growing up. So with that, I will stop, because I could go on forever. Thank you for giving me a chance to share.
Now, that was precious. Did it have to stop? Okay. So so, Caroline, what are we going to do?
I'm muted. I was muted. Sorry, I was jumping in there. Thank you so much for that. That was just beautiful, inspiring, and just so much fun to hear. I mean, just one of the most enjoyable talks I think we've had in forever. And certainly, it just felt very necessary to hear that right now. I mean, it felt very uplifting to hear that right now. And I'm guessing everybody else probably feels as moved as I do. And I just love the idea of creating a pilgrimage. I mean, is this sort of like, had anybody else done this pilgrimage before you did, or is this?
No, yeah. So I ended up walking to 18 different Black Madonnas on this particular pilgrimage. It was a little over 400 miles. It took 5 weeks. I don't know French, and I was in a part of France where no one speaks English. And I didn't know that this was, in my head, I knew that all these Black Madonnas are there because it's a volcanic region. But also in my head, I didn't connect that I was going to be hiking through mountains to get to. I ended up doing all this backpacking, and I decided to go in the winter, so it was snowing.
Oh, wow. In the winter? Yeah. That sort of makes it even more brilliant, though.
December. Like, yeah. So. But yeah, it's just one of the things I really like about the Black Madonna is that she's very the devotion to her is very embodied. In general with the divine feminine. I think that's one of the things we lose with only masculine conceptions of God, is that our connection to God is all in our head. And that's what we're taught. And with the Black Madonna, pilgrimage is a really big part of what it means to be devoted to her. And so every single Black Madonna I visited, I was just in a lineage of hundreds of thousands of pilgrims who have walked, I mean, not really in modern times, but in medieval times and stuff like that, who walked to go see them. And so I wanted to be part of that. And so that's why I went. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that last thing you said.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just said, and that's why that's one of the reasons why I wanted to walk, but also to reclaim my relationship to the earth as a Black woman, because it's just been stolen through enslavement and domestic servitude and environmental racism. And I was definitely that Black woman who was like, I don't want to be out in the, there's bugs and my hair. And we just aren't taught as a culture that the earth is our mother, and that Black women, the earth is a Black woman. And many of the Black Madonnas are really connected to the earth. They were either found in the earth, or they were found in the woods, or they're made of the volcanic rock. And so it was really beautiful for me to be able to connect with them on a bodily level, to honor the pilgrims who've gone before me, but also to honor my body and the sacredness of my own body. Yeah,
that's amazing.
It was fun.
Did the Cathedral of Le Puy, is that how you pronounce it?
Well, I don't know French, but yeah, I call it Le Puy.
Yeah. Did they sort of, how did they explain her existence? Because she seems to be sort of outside of the norm of what they would sort of believe or preach, or
I mean, I would say in general, the explanations for the Black Madonna are racist. So what you'll hear on tour, so the vast majority of the Black Madonnas I visited don't have the trappings of, they're not like tourist sites. Some of them are. So if you go to the Black Madonna of Montserrat outside of Barcelona, there will be buses going to see her, and hundreds, you'll be waiting in line. It's like Disneyland, almost like you're waiting in line for the ride, and then you go see her. And I did that tour at one point. And they basically say she's dark because they explicitly say she's not Black. At least my tour guide said that. She's dark because the candles, over the time, people have lit so many candles that she's dark. So they always have some sort of reason for her Blackness, other than this is a Black-bodied God. And then if you talk to most people, in these little villages in France, they'll love the fact that she's Black, but that won't necessarily mean anything in a racial context. It usually means she helps us as we face death. She's the queen of the underworld. She helps us, she's a Black light who helps us navigate sort of murky times. All of those things I agree with. But as I went on my exploration, it was really important for me, kind of in the lineage of Kelly Brown Douglas, to say, and her body is Black. And that means something. Mm-hmm. And I'm the only Black woman I know of who's written a book on the Black Madonna. And so there's lots of white women who've written books, and she's completely disembodied in their books. Her female body is as alive and well, and they talk about her female body, but her body is not Black. Yeah. She's a Black light. All of a sudden she's ephemeral. And I think that's because they aren't comfortable dealing with the internalized white supremacy that they would have to release if they really recognized that her body was Black and that she's a Black woman, just like any other Black woman on the street. Yeah.
Well, I'm guessing we must have a lot of questions, observations, thoughts to share. Linnea?
Yeah, I'm really intrigued by Anana. I had never heard of her before. And that was in France also, right?
She's a Mesopotamian god. So so it's fascinating because I didn't know this until even after my pilgrimage. For the first 15,000 to 25,000 years of human existence, God was only a woman. And like 100%, and these were all Black and brown people who worshiped her in what we now call the global South. Part of it was the fact that people didn't understand the cause and effect relationship of sex and procreation, because you have sex and then 9 months later a baby comes, and so they didn't quite know that male seed had anything to do with a baby coming out. So the woman was the giver of life exclusively. So that's part of the reason why God was a Black woman, but then also the woman was associated with crops and water, rain, and the seasons and all that kind of stuff. So it wasn't really until much later, either around 15,000 or like 25,000 before the Common Era, that the northern peoples sort of evolved or whatever, came on the scene. Think Vikings essentially, and they had this conception of a male god who was violent and all about conquering, kind of like they were, almost like we see God in our own image. Because up until that point, the world generally was like peaceful, nomadic folks who were like, farmers, gatherers, and so they're called the Indo-Europeans. They eventually amassed power in the north, then colonized the south, brought their male colonizer, their male conquering god with them. If you really do research, it's a little, I remember spending a whole weekend in sobs, like heaving sobs, because there's a lot of research that shows that this Indo-European male god who rains fire and is up on the mountain and is a sky god, because the god as female was always associated with the earth, and she was also Black or brown. Because she was associated with the earth, one of the old terms for her was Mother Moist Earth, which I just think that's actually my Wi-Fi network at my house, because I just love that. I just love to be reminded of that name. It's so beautiful to me. And so they brought their God down to the global South when they colonized the global South. And Sarah, Abraham's wife, was Indo-European. And it's not clear whether Abraham was Indo-European, but he was clearly raised in an Indo-European colonized culture. And so when Yahweh appeared to Abraham, Yahweh looked almost exactly like the Indo-European gods. And so if you go and look at how they showed up in the world, what their laws and decrees were, it's almost verbatim what you see the Levites' laws were. It's like, whew, it's a lot.
When I was teaching British literature, I noticed the same clash between patriarchy of the Roman Catholic Church and the religion of the original inhabitants of Britain, and which was female oriented and earth oriented. Mm-hmm. But I never, in studying all that literature, I never heard anything about the Blackness of God. Do you know anything in that region about the Blackness?
In Western Europe, like England. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Some of the Celtic goddesses I can't remember any of the names right now, but some of the Celtic goddesses are connected to or are seen as having the same energy as some of the dark goddesses. I know in Eastern Europe, there are tons of like dark goddesses. So if you're Poland, Russia, Ukraine, like there are tons of them. And actually, there's a really good book called The Black Madonna in Latin America and Europe that you might want to look at. And she draws the connections between the goddesses in Europe the Yoruba goddesses in West Africa, and also the syncretism between them both, and like Brazil and Cuba and stuff like that. Yeah,
Okay.
the Black Madonna in Latin America and Europe.
And Europe. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Pastor David?
Yeah, I was listening and I heard you, Christina, reference some books that I know that several of us have read, whether it's Richard Rohr or even going back to Bernard of Clairvaux in the 12th century. And it seems like there is an evolution, because even someone like you mentioned Jacqueline Grant, White Women's Christ, Black Women's Jesus. Even someone like her, who was definitely, I mean, each of these figures can be seen as ahead of their time, each of these authors. And certainly that would be true for Jacqueline Grant. But in retrospect, even Jacqueline Grant is kind of dated, I guess you might say. I mean, because she just, she wasn't aware, or doesn't present a consciousness of, the range of gender, things like that. And so I kind of see you as maybe, I see you as ahead of your time in some ways, like that. And I'm wondering, what will it take for even Christina Cleveland's thought to become dated?
Oh gosh, I hope so. Yeah, and so I think collective liberation looks a lot like individual liberation, in that we're always awakening, and the next generation is going to be a little more awakened than just like last decade. I was, I hope hopefully this decade I'm more awakened than I was last decade. And I love the fact that I have a love-hate relationship with my first book that came out like 9 years ago, because it means that I've evolved. I'm a little scared by authors who like stand by every word of their like book 10 years ago. Although that's what I was taught, right? Faithfulness means steadfast belief, no matter what. Faithfulness means never changing, never, and so I already think my book is obsolete, in the sense that, even in the second chapter, I recognize, I'm talking about God as a Black woman. And there are non-binary people, and femininity and femaleness are not 100% like in concert with each other. And there's so many ways to be female and not be feminine, and be feminine and not be female. And so I acknowledge that in it, just saying like, I'm sharing this one, this one way of looking at God. And I hope it joins a whole chorus of different ways of looking at God. And so, I love I've already had so many beautiful conversations with trans folks, with non-binary folks, with Indigenous people who are writing their own versions, kind of inspired by my story. And I love that. And it's like, gosh, I hope all my book does is really affirm that everyone can connect with, imagine a God who relates to their experience and affirms their experience. And I think like, that's what I liked about Jacqueline Grant. I don't agree with everything Jacqueline Grant said, and I don't agree with all of her methodology, because I've been privileged enough to be exposed to other ways, but she gave me a little opening to go on my journey.
Yeah, think about it. She wrote that book in the 80s. I mean, that's quite a while back. For her to be thinking that way was very progressive. Very,
very, yeah.
I mean, I know, I don't think you were around in the 80s. But
I was born in 1980.
Oh, okay.
I was here for all the 80s.
So you were here for it, but for someone like me who wasn't exposed to Jacqueline Grant or that kind of thought, it almost seems otherworldly, at the time,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the kind of that she was not safe. She was not writing things that were safe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Someone in the
Yeah.
chat asked about the serpent aspect in Genesis, which is another thing I talk about in my book. That is another thing that I discovered on the my awakening to the divine feminine and the Black Madonna, was that the serpent has forever been associated with the divine feminine and with feminine wisdom. And the way I sort of think about it metaphorically is like if you just see a swoosh anywhere in the world here, you'll know it's Nike. In the ancient world, if people saw a serpent like that, they would know that's the divine feminine. Like the serpent was the emblem of the divine feminine. So, it's interesting that the patriarchal leaders who retold the Genesis story positioned the serpent as the anti-truth, as the problem, because everyone would have understood the serpent is the divine feminine. So they were intentionally inciting mistrust of feminine wisdom, the divine feminine, as a way to maintain patriarchal power. I threw the book across the wall and actually broke a piece out of the wall. So I had to then learn how to patch and drywall.
Ongoing evolution and learning experience.
Yes, the masculine coming into the marriage with the feminine. Yes.
Tanya?
First, I just want to say thank you so much for being here today. Your words and your experiences have been just such a joy for us. And just as I often find with this group, my mind is kind of right now. And so I think that my questions and my comments are probably super basic for you, but I can really relate to what you're saying about Christ and how Christ is in so many different people and situations. And I mean, we can see pictures of women doing things that are so Christ-like, and I think we can totally see that that's Christ. I mean, I totally wrap my head around, and I think that's beautiful. The thing that I think that we've been talking about gender, God's gender, in this group over the last year or so, and it's something that's really kind of new to me. And this idea, I think that I've just finally come to the conclusion that, why am I putting God into a box of gender? And so when you said that, that you don't think that God is, well, I can't remember enough. I don't want to quote you, but something about God not being male.
I think God is not contained by the binaries.
Okay, so maybe what I'm thinking is not totally off base of what you're saying then? I mean, can you expand on that idea a little bit about God being the gender of God a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, and this is just my musing, who knows? Because I think God is mystery among other things. But we're so limited by our just binary thinking in general. And the fact that we think God is male or female or male and female is probably really limiting, because God is beyond gender and beyond sexual assignment. So I just think, as a social psychologist, one of the things I learned in grad school is that language and consciousness are really closely tied together. It's actually hard to be conscious of something if you don't have language for it. So an example of this is some Maori tribes don't have a word in their language for grief. And so when someone dies, they say they're fatigued. And their experience is fatigue. But it's also probably grief, but there's no language for that. So it's hard to know, because we're so trapped in our binary language, what are we missing out in terms of our consciousness is the question. I think that's what I would think about God. I think God's just surprising and way more creative than we can imagine. My literary agent, just to give you an example, my literary agent, my book came out later than we'd hoped because of COVID and all the things, right? And she said, Christina, we better hurry up and get this book out because by this time next year, God's going to be a dragon to you. I'm like constantly pushing and experiencing, and so it's like there's like some truth in that, like.
Hey, Caroline, can we get Margie's question? Margie, maybe go ahead and ask it. The one chat. That's really essential, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I love hearing you talking about all these things because my mind's just going crazy. Like I'm making a connection between that series that I watched recently, Exterminate All the Brutes. And it blew my mind because I didn't see the connection between just the evolution of European culture and how it had always, it was going to really destroy any of the brown indigenous cultures. But when you said that about the male God, I thought, oh my gosh, that could explain it, because I'm like, why are Europeans bad? I mean, how did that happen? And then it made sense, like, oh well, of course their worldview then had this idea. And then honestly, as you're talking now about God being genderless, non-binary, it just made me think of almost, in every human, I don't know, like in psychology or anything like that, there's always a spectrum of human experience, and there's not right or wrong or black or white. It's always a spectrum. And it made me think, well, if humanity is created in the image of God, of course, then God is a spectrum of these things. So it's just encouraging to me that it's not that maybe, because I was having a hard time, honestly. I'm part white, and I have a hard time with like hating white culture so much. And I just feel like, well, it's not that white people are bad. In essence, it's that this culture that is, a violent culture that's trying to overthrow. Anyway, that's what's happening with me right now. I'm just thinking all these thoughts. It's just giving me some foundation, maybe theological or spiritual foundation for these things.
Yeah. And I think like, rather than saying that God is genderless, I'd probably say God is all the genders and more. And I'd say rather than God is raceless, I'd say God is all the races and more. And I would be really, really, really excited if white people actually believed in a white God, because that would mean that they would finally believe that they're sacred, and then they would stop annihilating everybody else. Like, so the fact that we've had this image of a white God hasn't actually healed white identity. It's actually been like a curse on all of us. But I imagine if white people actually found themselves in the divine, that would be like 99.9% of my headaches gone. Same thing with men, right? What if men actually found themselves in the divine? I'm like reading this book by my beloved Matthew Fox. It's called, I'll read it because you probably can't see it, The Hidden Spirituality of Men, 10 Metaphors to Awaken the Sacred Masculine. He's an 82-year-old white gay man, but he and I are in love with each other. And I just adore him. And this book is powerful because he's really inviting men into really finding themselves in the divine. And then you can actually stop bullying others. My brother is on his, like, I'm completely different than the rest of my family. I've gone on this journey all by myself. And my brother's been really a gift to me because he has found ways to stay in touch with me despite all of this, and has really pursued friendship with me. And we were talking the other day about some LGBTQ issues, and we were in a long discussion where I was really challenging him on some of his beliefs. And he said, Christina, 3 years ago, if we'd had this conversation, you would have just yelled at me and basically shamed me for not believing what you believe. And he's like, I just noticed that in this conversation, you have really called me in and you have really challenged me, but you've done it in a way that has embraced me, even though it's obvious that you want me to believe differently than I believe. And I just said, yeah, well, the more I get connected to the fact that God is a Black woman, the less I have to play God, because it means that it's handled. Like Black women can handle it. If God's a Black woman, whatever issue I have with my brother or anybody, she can handle. And so I don't have to be a bully. I don't have to, and also I can affirm that God gets me and is with me, and I don't need everyone else to affirm what I believe. And so it's amazing, like the transformation in my own life in just coming into my sacredness and how it's changed relationships in ways that I wouldn't have even known, and has given me a chance to treat other people with their holding their sacredness up too. Yeah, and I was definitely taught to be a spiritual bully. Like that's what it meant to be a leader in my church.
That feels sort of very relevant to what we're all experiencing right now, I think.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Isn't, I mean, I don't know. Does anybody else, before we jump back to Lene, does anybody else have a comment that they want to share?
Yes, I have something. Christina, I love your growth, and I'm just so appreciative of your ministry today. I want you to know that. It just really blesses me. And I wanted to ask a question. I'm about a third of the way through your book, and the beginning was so exciting and funny. So I wanted to know, did you bring a replica of that
That
Madonna?
Black Madonna?
Yeah.
No. So
Oh.
the book opens with me getting chased by the police in Mauriac, France. I was a fugitive. That Black Madonna. So if you have my book, a paper copy of my book, there are pictures of most of the Black Madonnas on my that I just took with my iPhone. I didn't know I would even be writing about my story. And I don't have one of the Black Madonna of Mauriac because I didn't get to spend enough time with her to take a good picture. And actually, when I was back in France for 3 months earlier this year, Mauriac's one of the few Black Madonnas I didn't revisit. I'm pretty sure there's probably still an APB out on me in Mauriac. And it's this teeny tiny village. Everywhere I go, people remember me because this part of France, they call it deep France, like the deep South. It's very French. There's hardly any Black people, especially outside of the one major city. I don't speak French. I mean, everybody remembers me. So I have not gone back and I don't have a picture of her. But she's wonderful. Oh, she's wonderful. I will go back, but I'll just probably go back with like a bunch of white women or something. And that way they'll be like, oh, it must be safe.
We'll go with you. We'll accompany you.
Yeah.
Do you need volunteers?
My reparations entourage. Yes.
Yeah. I want to agree with Diane. I love the opening to your book. It was funny and immediate, and it got you right into the story. So I loved it too.
Thank you.
Any other? Emily, Michelle, Lisa, anybody else got some observations to share?
I have a quick comment, which is just, I mean, this has been such a wonderful conversation to hear and to learn from, and thank you for being here. But I think one of the most, I mean, there's lots of exciting things that have been said, but something that's feeling really exciting to me right now as someone who like recently graduated college is thinking about learning, like true deep learning as this embodied practice, and like imagining you like doing this pilgrimage and like imagining what you're feeling as you're like walking through the snow, and like I don't know, I feel like the way that experience is linked to this information that you're cultivating and sharing is so beautiful. And I feel like I'm like tearing up because I'm like, oh, I just love the way that like true divine connection happens like through like the lived body and like lived experience. And that is like really inspiring to me this morning.
Thank you.
Maybe we have time for one more comment. One more comment or question?
I'll make this really quick. It's me, Rosie. Two things. One is to me, God is mysterious in every imaginable way. He is mysterious. Or she, however, you know, we describe God. To me, God is mysterious. And then the other thing I wanted to say was in reference to the Black Madonnas. You know, in the Latino culture, even like the Virgen is referred to as La Morenita. And the Morenita is the dark one, the black one. So I think that's beautiful as well. Thank you. It was really amazing to hear you share. And in my mind, just the work that is the work that is still to be done to decolonize and deconstruct what has been around in terms of the image of who God is. This is heavy. This is extremely heavy. Yeah, thank you.
And one final comment from Linnea.
Oh, I just wanted to say, I really love what you've said about God containing all gender, all race. And I was wondering how the concept of the Trinity, how all this would fit in with the concept of the Trinity. I know that in the Old Testament, I've always perceived spiritually like a multiplicity within the Godhead. And so the Trinity concept has always kind of puzzled me. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that, so I don't know your name, Galaxy A12, Rosie, who mentioned the Virgin of Guadalupe. It's very similar with the Black Madonnas, because the Black Madonna, the Guadalupe, the ancient goddesses like Isis and Inanna, but also Kali of Hinduism, Tara of Buddhism. There are all of these different goddesses in sort of organized religion or like institutional religion, and also indigenous religions that have the same energy as the Black Madonna. But they show like a different facet of the divine feminine. And so I actually think the divine feminine is inherently a multiplicity, and there are no divine feminine theologies that really are monotheistic in the way that the patriarchy always needs to have a top dog. It always needs to have a higher power. And so you don't see that really in the divine feminine. It's all of these energies or these images that work together and complement each other. And similarly to the Trinity, I would say, as like personally as a theologian, the thing I like most about the Trinity is how it gives me license to, and I'm going to swear, make shit up, because there's nothing in the Bible that really substantiates the Trinity explicitly. It's really more of an experiential knowing that has resonated with a lot of people, and that's why. But it's an experiential knowing, right? And so that's really divine. That's like a very divine, feminine, matriarchal way of understanding and relating to God. I feel it. It expands my heart. It helps me to love myself and others more. Therefore, it's true, whether there's historical or sort of biblical evidence for it. And so to me, it's sort of Christianity's patriarchal way of breathing life into divine feminine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. I would love to, I have just a little quote from Clarissa Pinkola Estes that I'd love to share with you all if I can. Clarissa Pinkola Estes wrote a book that a lot of white baby boomers love. It's called Women Who Run with the Wolves. You might have heard of it. It was like an international bestseller. About 12 years later, she wrote, in my opinion, a much better book about the Virgin of Guadalupe and the Black Madonna, called Untie the Strong Woman, that wasn't nearly as successful. But that's the one that has some really just powerful theology. And in that book, in one of the chapters on the Black Madonna, she invites us, and this is sort of my, I guess, blessing for anyone who is feeling uncertainty and fear this weekend. She says, may we remember how deeply incubated we are in Holy Mother, we the children of the dark-skinned holy woman who is unafraid of any dark. I'll read it one more time. May we remember how deeply incubated we are in Holy Mother, we the children of the dark-skinned holy woman who is unafraid of any dark. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of your community today.
Thank you for coming.
Yes, thank you for being with us. I don't even think I mentioned here that we know Christena. At least we knew the Christena of some years ago, and I think because of reading and following, we know Christena now. But yeah, she did her PhD work at UCSB. She taught at Westmont, and she's very dear to us. And we are very joyful to have this connection go on. And I think that we will probably have there will be more of us reading your book, and probably Anna Legat's book too, and who knows whatever else. But we really appreciate the gift that you are. And I was sitting here thinking, you know, after more of us read your book, maybe sometime down the road in the years to come, we can have you back to address us. And then I thought, yeah, Christena will probably come back because, you know, those churches aren't inviting her back yet. So, we will fill that place, that vacuum. Yeah.